Good morning. Welcome back to Daybreak on Citizen TV, the show that brings what you need to think about as you begin the day. And it's time for news review at 11 minutes, going to 10 minutes before 7 o'clock. And I'm joined by three members of parliament, all male. Yesterday we had all female guests, but today we have Dr. Chris Omalo from Kiminini, member of parliament in that constituency, Karibu Sana. And then we have Anthony Oluoch from Mathare constituency and Kimani, not Kimani, Gunjiru Wambogo. Gunjiru Wambogo from Nyeri Town, Karibuni Sana. Right, and I just want us to begin from the story that you are discussing, and that is to do with the news that we aired earlier on this show, the report by Stephen Leto indicating the questions into the utilization of funds at the constituencies. And of course, we saw that at Embakasi North constituency, 84.1 million shillings has been termed as unaccounted for. For Langata, it's 21.4 million shillings. Kamukunji, 14 million shillings. At Starehe, a constituency here in Nairobi County, there is a renovation of a toilet at the Jivanji Gardens. It cost 705,000. Of course, in Garissa town, that's where the majority leader, the Ndwale, comes from. There is 11.8 million shillings that went into bursaries, but it cannot be accounted for on really the actual recipients. And then 3.9 million shillings could not be, there is no certificate of execution. And then from Kiminini, your constituency, Dr. Chris Omalo, 4.9 million shillings cannot be accounted for, and they say that it's out of committee expenses and there is no invitation letters. I know at the Constituency Development Fund, you do not have sort of an executive role in the utilization of the fund, but you have an oversight role as the patron of the CDF committee of Kiminini. So what is this that you are saying, 4.9 million shillings that cannot be accounted for? Why have you been able to see this during your oversight role?
Yes, thank you very much for that very good question. And I think it is a responsibility of the Kenyans also to understand the mandate of a member of parliament and the role of the Auditor General. When you look at Article 226 of the Constitution, it clearly spells out that any public entity that where you spend government money, the Auditor General must be able to go and audit. And when it comes to matters of auditing, they're supposed to give the true and fair statement. So in this case, when it comes to matters of CDF, it is a requirement that when you get the new members of the CDF committee and the members of the PMC, PMC means Project Management Committee, and these are the people who implement the CDF projects. For instance, like in my case, this is to do with the head teachers of the schools, the principals of the schools, the chairman of those boards, the treasurer, I'm told, and the other committee members. This is a training that they were called to go and train in. And when the Auditor General came in, because when I saw this yesterday night, I called the fund accounts manager. And the fund accounts manager is the AIE holder. The fund accounts manager is an employee from the ministry, from the national government. As per the national government CDF, an MP has no role when it comes to the issues of implementation. What happens with the MP is to provide oversight. So when I saw this, I asked the fund manager, because I've put it very clear. And even when you look at Article 226, sub-article around at 6 there, it says that any public officer that in one way directs money and the money is misappropriated, that person is particularly supposed to be held accountable. So like, for instance, for Kiminini, when I asked the fund manager, hey, I'm seeing this, what happened? Then he says, no, what happened is it's a requirement from the CDF board that the project management committee implementers must be trained on how projects are done or are carried out in the constituency, how to implement the CDF projects, the issues of tendering, the issues of opening tenders, the issues of bringing bids, the issues of tax compliance and all that. All those things, they are trained. So what the Auditor General did, the training was done, there was evidence, but now the invitation was done through SMS. So the Auditor General wanted to see. That's why they talked of invitation letters. Then I asked, where is the invitation letter? So he said there was one invitation letter, but because we are calling all the head teachers, the principals, we are calling the board members, they come from different areas and we have the SMS, it was easier for us to send the text messages. Even as when you go to our parliamentary groups or in parliament there's something, we use through the text messages. So when the auditor queried that, and which I agree with him, he should actually, for purposes of verification, he'll go and show the letter that it's true, this is the invitation letter, but we invited through the text messages. And the audit query will be cleared. So when an Auditor General brings an audit query, does not necessarily mean that the money has been lost. And this is what the public needs to know. And it's also a responsibility of the Auditor General when such a query has been cleared. I think it's fair also to come back and say, this query has been cleared. Because they raised the query.
That's all fine. That's all fine, Dr. Chris Omalwa, that it doesn't necessarily mean that the money has been stolen. But when you have instances that government agencies can actually now call people to meetings or seminars or workshops using an SMS line, that's a part that can be misused. It doesn't matter how well-intended your committee is, but this is an avenue that can be abused.
I agree with you, but now what happens, the Auditor General, once they come, normally when an audit has been done, there's something called management exit. So if you have audited an entity, it is your responsibility as the person who audited. There are some queries that you had raised. Now you sit with the accounting officer to bring up those issues. So he's supposed to come and address. So as far as I'm concerned, when I asked the fund manager went explained and showed evidence or the requirement from the CDF board that the PMCs have to be trained, the CDFCs has been trained. And as far as I'm concerned, the audit query, for instance, as far as Kimini is concerned, has been cleared. But looking at other members of parliament cutting across, like for example the bursaries, I was looking at the issue of Garissa, and it's many concerns across the board. Normally what happens when it comes to bursaries, you send a check, let's say a school like Stare Boys, you've given like, let's say from Wambuku's constituency, you've given like 1 million. Normally there's something called a schedule, which you need to attach to show who are these specific beneficiaries. And when I saw one of the other queries, they say they did not see the schedule. So when you go back to the school, even that school will also bring out the issue of the schedule. The schedule will come and show that these are the beneficiaries, this is Kamau, Njoroge, Wafula, and from their respective wards where they come from. So the issue are the beneficiaries from the constituencies. So it's an issue of documentation. And when you look at Kotutu 6, one of the responsibilities of the government officers, they must put clear records so that when the Auditor General comes, you should be able to present to the Auditor General. In the absence of that, it becomes an audit query.
And so now that the Auditor General is the one who has pointed that out at your constituency, as a person who is responsible for the oversight of that fund in your constituency, had you been able to see these, and what challenges are you facing that make it so difficult for you to point out certain inconsistencies?
In fact, this matter came up in Parliament last week. You realize that the senators wanted to be given some money for monitoring and evaluation. Even us as members of Parliament, because we also need to go to the CDF, get the records and try to point out. But for instance, about this matter, it is a matter I was conversant with. Because when I went, and it comes to the administrative costs, or that administrative cost, and the fund manager is the AIE. I went, I asked the fund manager had told me about this matter, and he had already responded. So whatever the report came out, this is something historical that happened some 3 years ago, in the last, 2015.
2013,
actually it's 2014, 2015, yeah. So, and it had already been, answered. And when such an audit query comes, remember it must come to the National Assembly. Traditionally, it has been through the Public Accounts Committee, where that specific fund manager comes with the CEO of the CDF board. They're the ones who are held accountable, not even a member of parliament. But because we provide oversight, we get interested. So as far as this issue is concerned, this matter had already been cleared. The letters of invitation were presented, and it's a matter that was cleared long time ago. In fact, I was surprised it is coming out now. Should have come out some years ago, that particular time.
But of course, Dr. Chris, you've been in Parliament now for how many years? 6, going to 7?
Yes, I'm doing my second term.
Yes, and do you know that most of the time that we have the Auditor General coming up with reports of previous years, of course, there is that backlog. And I want to bring this conversation to the rest of you, because you're also patrons at your constituency development funds. And I'm saying that according to Section 53 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act, the Constituency Oversight Committee shall be comprised of the constituency member of parliament, member of the National Assembly, that's you, and not more than 4 other members appointed by the MP for the constituency in consultation with other stakeholders. And the constituency member of the National Assembly shall, in consultation with the Constituency Oversight Committee, at least twice in every financial year, and upon giving notice of at least 14 days, convene public forums for purposes of course, several things, including mobilizing and sensitizing the respective target groups or any other on any other matter related to the fund, and also soliciting views, opinions, and proposals. And I just want to raise the question, because we are seeing these according to the Auditor General. When you call this, I'm assuming that you call this consultative forums, maybe you can start by telling us whether you do, and when you're calling for those and engaging with these committees, are you able to point out or see situations of inconsistencies in the procedures of the fund?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think the constituency committees, the oversight committee, it is true that the Member of Parliament is a patron, and the requirement under the NG-CDF Act requires that you call at least 2 public forums, and these are mandatory because as part of public participation that is now entrenched in the Constitution itself. In order to be able to identify development priorities, you need to be able to engage and get the views and opinions of people. So that is a requirement, and yes, we do it. For this year, for the 2018-2019, we are yet to do it for my constituency, but we will do it. We also have deadlines to be able to submit this, which I think it's towards the end of this year. So perhaps we will have our public participation before the end of the year. Having said that, the Member of Parliament his role is really limited to oversight. You remember that the funds manager is the AIE holder and is accountable directly to the board. You may raise questions, you may raise inconsistency when you see it, but then again you need to be able to rely on official documentation. Audit questions are just that, audit questions. They are meant to flag out and to raise questions that have not been answered, and that's the underlying word. If and when the documentations are provided to respond to these queries, I think the part that the Auditor General really plays to the public gallery is to post and flag constituencies and put them on headlines and sensationally make claims. And we are not saying that misuse may not be taking place, just like counties. Constituency may be hubs for misuse of public funds, and if and when they do, they ought to be flagged out. But what happens when the queries have been answered? For example, when schedules have been provided, receipts have been given, explanations tendered, why don't you have another document that clears Kiminini? Because somebody is going to say, Mheshimiwa ulihepa na 4.9 million yetu. And for the records, where I would have a problem, and in terms of inconsistencies and gaps, would be to say that the constituency is engaging in activities they never planned for. The first point of call for me in the audit queries, was it part of the authorized approved plan? That's the entry point. If, for example, this training was never approved, then you'd be asking Kiminini or Madara or whoever, why is this there? Then you go to the second question. And I think really invitation letter should be at the tail end. The actual question is, this was supposed to be constructed, can I see it? People went for this meeting. You can do interviews. There are various other ways in which you can be able to find out, did this training take place? Members of Parliament are such that we attend meetings all the time. And if members of Parliament are summoned, I just came back from Mombasa for our ICT committee meeting. We get all our invitation through text messages, including trips abroad. But
is that recognized by your standing orders as a way of communicating?
It is. It is in the standing orders.
But,
and remember...
But the same is not expressly approved in the operations of CDF. Because in government, the general regulation or the general policy is that invitation is by official
The question is... Let's begin from the beginning, and it's good to always look at something holistically rather than to isolate one particular issue. The whole idea of having procedures and processes is so that you tighten loopholes. If one, it was planned for, you put a tick there. Number two, you can carry out interviews. There will probably be travel documents, isn't it?
Attendance list and signing.
Yes. And if, for example, this was in our schedule, the schedules are posted and shared. Like, this is our itinerary. That serves as a notice. If, for example, I know that in the November of 2018, I had a schedule of the whole year, that's an invitation. It's already, I am on notice already. The idea is to notify somebody that this is there.
Okay.
And remember, for you to be able to have gone there, the fund manager doesn't keep money in his safe. You probably have tendered the documents to the procurement people or to the DA, and there's a paper trail of approvals that, yes, you can go for this trip, and the DA and the persons who do due diligence have been able to ascertain that this was part of the plan, and the money is available. If all that is done, why would you concentrate on an SMS, a mode of communication? I think that's being pedantic, really.
Well, but it's the Auditor General's views. What do you have to say?
Actually, my problem with this conversation is the Auditor General looks at whether you have misused funds. And what he should be telling us is, when they sent the SMS and people came, these people who came, first and foremost, were they the ones who were supposed to come? Because you must have had a list of people you're inviting. So he should be saying, you guys had a list of 20 people, and because you used SMS, 40 people came, for example. So you misused funds. Second thing is, an SMS costs what? A shilling. A letter, if I'm going to post a letter, I am going to write a letter, I am going to print the letter, I am going to have it delivered. Just looking at the cost of delivering letters to, like, for example, I have close to 100 schools. If I'm meeting the principals and the board members of my school and what, so the Auditor General should be telling us, am I supposed to write a letter to each and every one of those people to invite them? So that now you're telling me, I did not write to the 100 or 200 people who are members of this board, I sent them an SMS. There's a certain lack of seriousness in that particular query. But then even much more fundamental is what my colleagues have been saying. We have a problem with what we focus on issues of audit. Every time I come here, I notice that you guys have a biometric system that manages how you come in. And what the Auditor General does, for example, is, let's say you're here at work, right? But somehow the guy who is in charge of checking whether you actually checked in can't see you on the system. So he asks, by the way, I didn't see you in the system yesterday. Were you at work? Now, even before you answer, somebody has already gone to the newspaper and written that so-and-so did not go to work. You get? That's the problem of how we deal with the audit queries in this country. That we are not dealing, the Auditor General has come and said, I see you guys spent money to cover a certain expense, but I can't see the documentation to support that expense. But the thing now is, that becomes the conversation, that particular person has stolen that money. Well, and the auditor will give them 2 weeks or whatever period. In that period, he will get the documentation. But the auditor never comes back and says, remember that query I had? I got the documentation. And you guys of the newspapers and the media never actually go back to Wamalwa's constituency and ask him, by the way, that audit query of SMS, how did you guys sort it?
Did you just call us Watu wa Magazeti in English?
Watu wa Magazeti.
Let's not miss the point, because you're talking about the financial year of 2013-2014. The Auditor General is not here, but the sessions that I've attended, that he was briefing Parliament during committees of PIC and PAC, he would say that they raised questions, they asked for documentation, it was never supplied, and that is why they go ahead to write a report with a qualified opinion.
Yes.
So if you look at the list that we have here, Mbakasi North 84.1 million shillings, Garissa Town 11.8 million shillings that went into bursaries, but there is no supporting documentation of who really received and what did they actually receive that money. It will show you there's a way of doing things at the Constituency Development Fund in different constituencies that documentation is not readily available, and that's a problem.
Let me give you an example. I wasn't even, auditors were in my CDF a month or so ago. They were looking at a period when I was not even a member of Parliament.
Yes.
Right? And as they were going, they were there for 4 days. In those 4 days, they're looking for, they walk in, they tell you, we are coming. then they show up and they say, look, we need to look at the projects that you did during this period. So they look through the projects, and they're picking files and looking through projects. Some of those files are on the ground. They want to see them on the ground. Then they come back and say, we can't find A, B, C, D. They're there for 4 days. Right. Then they leave, right? Then they go and make a report of what they did in your constituencies.
Don't they allow you time to furnish them with the documentation?
Which report do you deal with? The one after they give you time, or the one that they asked the questions with?
No,
because usually the reports that go out to the
time?
media. No, I'm telling you, of course they do. But the reports that actually get covered on media are the ones where they queried, not the ones that got answered. Do you know what the point I'm making? The question where, and this is also something that even politicians do, if I want to make Wamalo look bad, I will look for the questions that were asked by the auditors, and I will deal with these ones, rather than the answers that he gave. So we have, if we are going to be honest in audit, so that we're actually dealing with issues, we are looking at an issue, these questions were asked, you were given 6 months, what did that person actually say? Because there must be something they said. They said, I cannot find the receipts. There must be something they said. That's what we should be dealing with. You were asked these questions and you said you don't have the receipts. Not that these receipts cannot be found. Because you don't have for example, you don't have, in that report, you don't have Wamalo CDF manager's response in that report. You get what I'm saying? Because my understanding, I've worked with the media for a while, my understanding is that there's always 2 sides to a story. Right. So when you write a story about Kimilili constituency, for example, and you write only the Auditor General's position. That's what is the fund manager's position?
Yes. That's why Dr. Chris is here as the patron of that committee.
But you see, you already read the story without the fund manager's position.
The thing is, in this country, when the Auditor General, who is mandated by law to be in office, when they raise questions on the utilization of public funds, it is a valid office. It is a valid question. Yes. So you cannot ignore it.
It is a question. But you see, questions are answered. How come you don't cover the answers?
That's a question.
No. But you see, we're not dealing with the answers.
Yes.
No, you already read the story yesterday. You didn't have the answers. You can't run a story on questions, and then we come here to do newspaper review and say we're answering answers.
So
come on, guys.
Talking about this particular, how now the constituency development funds are not able to supply this documentation. Have you been a member of PSC or PIC?
I'm a member of PIC.
Yes.
And a ranking member, for that matter.
So when you receive reports from the Auditor General, from even the government ministries, and you guys hold to account the officers that come before you, the accounting officers like the principal secretaries, there are always questions of procedure that you raise, that there are certain things that are not being done in the right way.
Now let me explain, and it's good also for
no,
the
I've not
public.
The question. The question is, there is a procedure of how public finance should be managed and how the reports should be prepared, but they do not always do it that way. So where is the missing link?
Now let me explain, and it's also good for your knowledge. Yeah. Now, in Parliament there are 3 committees. The first committee is Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee deals with accounts of ministries. Then we have Public Investment Committee. The Public Investment Committee deals with the accounts of parastatals. Then now we have Special Funds Accounts Committee, which deals with now CDF. Things like CDF, Women Fund, and all that. When it comes to matters of procurement, they are guided by the Public Procurement Law. So many times when an auditor goes to an institution, for example, they'll go to, let's say they go to a constituency and they find a school has been built, a primary school. They'll want to know the process of procurement, whether the procurement process was done in line with the public procurement law. So he'll want to see evidence. Was there an advertisement, for instance, about this particular tender? How many people came in? How was the evaluation done? So when they come, at times they might not be able to see, they might ask for the advert. And the advert, for example, at the local level, is not necessarily, it must be in the newspapers. Because you have some specific amounts, which they can just do on the notice board at the DC's office, wherever it's good enough. So they'll ask, is there evidence? Let's see this. Okay? So they raise those queries. So what happens? Media picks the audit queries. And as my honorable member has clearly put
you cannot accuse the media for reporting what is
I'm not accusing. I'm not accusing. I'm saying they don't have accusing.
They don't have 2 sides.
Yeah.
Let me make the point.
So when they raise the query,
don't get defensive.
When they raise this query, then it is required that they must produce that evidence. And when they appear before Parliament, all these reports, by the way, for information, it goes to Parliament. And when it goes to Parliament, the accounting officer is the one who go and appear before the Parliament. The clearance is done at Parliament level. So like in this case, for example, the fund manager, who is an employee of the national government, comes with the CDF board boss and with a response. Now, for example, for community here, they'll come with a letter showing this is a letter, but because of maybe convenience and efficiency, they could not reach the head teachers. They have to do through the text messages. And it's cleared, and it ends there. So that is the process. Now when it comes to paracetamol, for example.
But that part will not be covered.
It will not be covered. You will cover this other side, but you don't cover this side. So the issue of audit query does not mean the money is lost.
Which is fine.
They want the documentation.
Right.
But what we are trying to say, as you raise the query, please also tell the public that yes, the documentation was provided and that audit query has been cleared, which is never done.
And Honorable Oluoch, primarily, shouldn't this documentation be readily available so that you do not have to ask for it? Should it be standard operating procedure?
Yes, I will agree on you on that, and that's the ideal. The process of procuring, putting up a project or any of the activities should be such that the paper trail is properly and well kept, and that's part of the reason I think that the NGCDFC are trained. They're taken for training. I think in this year alone, I think they've already done one for all the Nairobi constituencies, and our constituencies were put in there. And then within Mathare itself, we did take our people for training. The purpose of this is to ensure that not only the NGCDFC are well equipped in terms of the capacity and capability to be able to manage, but also to have administrative skills. Administrative skills means that for every single step that you take, the paperwork ought to be there. And I think more than anybody else, the CEO, who is the fund manager, should be on top of these things. Nevertheless, if and when that happens, because there may be oversight, there may be lapses, the requirement is that opportunity ought to be availed, and I think that's the purpose of the audit. Opportunity ought to be availed so that those documentations are given. And I will still go back to what my colleagues have said. If when they have been availed, this should be covered. I'll give you another example. This was an audit forum we attended for all Kera Roads Board in Mombasa, for all Nairobi constituencies. And they were taking us through the purpose of audit. The purpose of audit is not to find fault. The purpose of audit is to build confidence in part of the process. It's part of helping in creating confidence in the management of anything. So this approach that audit is about, Kimilili has done this, I think it's a wrong approach to audit, and which is what I think we will kind of do. And they gave us a very interesting example of somebody who built I think some road, and as a result of some act of God, rain or whatever, it was completely washed away. And from the records, unfortunately, they didn't even take the photos. But the Kera people devised other ways in which they tried to find out, was this road or was it not made? They did interviews, they went to the ground, they took technical engineers, and true to Nini, when they went downstream, at the end, they could see very good evidence of road materials that appeared to have been washed. If they had used this kind of Auditor General's approach that we can't see this, that guy would have been committing maximum prison. But they took a step, and that's the point here. Auditors are not about finding fault. It's part of trying to create confidence in processes.
Okay, someone is texting us. This is Chashi from Suba. He says that an invitation letter, attendance sheet, and any transport reimbursement forms are essential accounting documents in any public expenditure. The auditor was right to flag out the lack of this. And I hear we have some feedback on Twitter. Maybe we can look at that. That is Sam Makoha saying that the problem with MP's mentality is just a fixed one. Auditors are coming for witch hunt in their constituency, quote unquote, if you allow them to do their jobs.
I don't think this is about MPs. Again, I mean, we are patrons. This idea that constituency and CDF is about members of parliament, I think we changed that a long time ago.
Right.
We patronize, and I think we need to be able to see a patron of a school. He comes there every so often and checks that things going all right, and Our main role under the Constitution, Article 95, is very clear. It is to represent our people, to resolve the problems of Parliament, to give oversight to government, and to legislate, and perhaps to do budget and budget appropriation. Our patronizing role, and you've called us here to try and shed light. Shedding light doesn't mean being defensive. I think that's a misplaced concern.
Okay, and finally, Francisca from Makueni says that the MPs should not defend themselves, or what if the rest of government operated on SMS? Letters should be in the file. They can also be emailed or sent through WhatsApp. That's Francisca from Makueni. I think the point is made. And we now want to take a short break, but when we return, we'll continue with the news review on the various other topics that are making headlines in the